crimes of greed versus those driven by poverty, otherwise known as crimes of need.
For instance, when you go to a local community where you say poaching of elephants is heavy, you begin to ask yourself, what is the means of livelihood of the members of that community? They don't have light, they don't have water. There was a time we went for an impact assessment in one of the brass communities. And at the point of the impact assessment, we met with a chief, with one of the chiefs. And the man was telling me that I ain't got no problem with, he mentioned the oil company that was involved. He said, I ain't got no problem with them. We went into this place, we found out that the water was polluted and there was so much of crisis. But the leaders of the community were not ready to accept because they were living in splendor within their own small enclave as leaders. Again, you find out that in many of these community health provision for health services, all of these things are lacking. So much so that you will be surprised when you ask many of them, we are going to have an event. The best wear they will want to take out is what you will say you wear in the kitchen. And that is the reality of it. So you are now telling the person, don't poach. When somebody is going to give him money for poaching, you are telling him don't poach. What alternative have you provided for him? So you see that there is actually a disconnect in the way the whole thing is structured. And that is why there is a need for us to come to terms with it.
Poaching and illegal wildlife trafficking had reached unprecedented levels, robbing local communities of their livelihoods and eroding the global commons. Experts warn that there are no magic remedies to the problems of illegal wildlife trade other than a principled determination of the different levels of national governments to faithfully implement the mix of different solutions and strategies that had been put to the fore and already being implemented to some extent.
It's a multifaceted issue. The government has its blame, the society in general, we all have our blames because everybody, we are not looking at the bigger picture. Even by the time you try to tell people, encourage them to do what is right, they now say, now you sabi pass. And that kind of statement, you know, that kind of statement, oh, is that what we will chop? And things like that. So all those nonchalant attitude usually makes us to suffer. So it's an all-encompassing issue. We have economic issues, we have social issues, sometimes even religious issues, I know conflict issues, I know and all of this is further complicated by climate change, which is real. And a lot of people are denying it, but it's real. Because by the time you talk about climate change, there are a lot of things that are changing. Rainfall patterns are changing, and the duration, the timing is changing. So a lot of things are being affected. And when that changes, there will be forced migration. And when there's forced migration, because you are not going to a vacuum, you are going to where someone or some group of people are already occupying. And when there's that resource sharing, which usually the dialogue is not very much, it just happens, and before you know it, there's conflict. So by the time we see the interconnectivity of all of this, it helps us to be able to realize the problem, and then we'll be able to tackle it from all dimensions.
Despite the promulgation of the Endangered Species Act in 1985 and Nigeria's adherence to all the international treaties and protocols for the protection of the environment, positive action, real effective action, and expenditure on environmental conservation in the country had been negligible.
There are some cultural practices that actually encourage this wildlife hunting and the rest. So the real problem is enforcement. There are laws. I must tell you, the President of Nigeria signed off on the Endangered Species Act of 2016, some few months ago. So the truth is, the problem that we have is enforcement of these laws. And that's because of the cultural orientation, the way we see wildlife as bushmeat in our environment. So by the time you are talking about telling people not to hunt wildlife, they are going to tell you, what's your business with that? Even people, human beings are not, they are barely managing to survive. And you are talking about wildlife. They turn into a joking matter, you know. So it's actually our orientation. We need, how do we change our orientation to realize the fact that all living things are good for everybody. So if there are no wildlife again, then our own existence is also threatened. Mankind's existence is threatened. So that's because we all depend on ourselves.
The enforcement is where we find the gap, because the law enforcers don't even recognize the animal or the plant species that shouldn't be traded on. So you go to our streets, you find grey parrots, African grey parrots being sold, an endangered species being sold around, and then nobody is trying to enforce that law. So the problem is that law enforcement agents don't even know that. So there's a need for capacity building for law enforcers and prosecutors to be able to know what to do when they are confronted with such situations.
Statistics show that in some species, there have been decline in their populations of more than half in just 40 years. The species involved have included elephants for their tusks, rhinos for their horns, pangolins for their scales, lions and leopards for their skins, great apes for their meat, parrot and other tropical birds for pets, and even vultures in places like Nigeria for voodoo medicine.
The status of wildlife in the country leaves much to be desired, as the rate of depletion of the population of animals like the elephants, leopards, giraffes and crocodiles, among others, is frightening. Today, I know that if somebody says what is really the status of figures for wildlife in Nigeria, I am not sure I can tell you. If I'm going to say something, it is probably 10 years old in terms of its information and data. So if you have a data of 10 years, how well can you plan effectively to manage the activity that is involved?
In the past 4 years, Nigeria, Cote d'Ivoire, Mozambique, Angola, South Africa, Kenya, Zimbabwe, Ethiopia, Uganda, Malawi, and the Democratic Republic of the Congo have been the leading countries of origin for ivory exports. They also account for the greatest number of seizures and quantities of worked ivory products moving out of Africa, mostly by air. A report by the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species says whether ivory processing operations for export are occurring in all these countries remains to be established. But they were all previously identified as having ivory carving industries that appeared to be servicing demand in Asia, with the production of key generic products such as bangles, name seals and chopsticks. One of the over 4,000 tons of worked ivory seized, Nigeria led with more than 769 kilograms. In terms of destination, nearly 3/4 of these ivory products were destined for the Greater China market, including the special administrative regions of Hong Kong and Macau. This trade accounted for over 60% of the total weight in both periods. The next destination for this trade was Vietnam, which represented 8% of the total number of seizures and 16% of the total weight. Egypt, which has an unregulated domestic ivory industry of its own, was the most important non-Asian destination.